If you continue to bomb the rest of the world, they are going to come to your neighborhood. Government today is about war and waste. The way governments are run, they inspire war and they inspire waste. CIA's greatest fear is that I get an open source agency that demonstrates to the president that I can do 90% of what the president, the cabinet members need. It can be shared with the public in Congress, and we can cut the secret intelligence budget by 75%. So one of the reasons I came to Norway, apart from John's invitation, is because Vladimir Putin has offered Donald Trump a Reykjavik moment when they meet in Hamburg for the G20 in July this year. So I'm going back to Washington, and I already have some people interested in getting this videotape to Donald Trump so that he can see that there is actually a possibility for earning a legitimate Nobel, just as he earned a legitimate presidency. Barack Obama did not earn a legitimate Nobel. That was a disgrace to Norway and the Nobel Prize. So there are converging forces here, and I'm pleased to be here. But at the end of the day, it's about whether or not the rest of the world wants to listen. It's not about what I do. If Donald Trump were to barnstorm across the United States, I believe he could demonstrate to the public that the two-party tyranny needs to go and that we need to achieve democracy in the United States. I have realized that until governments make evidence-based decisions on behalf of the public, we cannot save the world. So electoral reform is about ensuring that every citizen has voice and vote. That's not the case in Norway today. It's not the case in the United States. In the United States of America, 70% of the voters are blocked. We have 8 parties in the United States, only 2 of which hold power. The other 6 are blocked from ballot access. And the independents are blocked from ballot access. So we actually have, as part of the deep state, you have the Rothschilds, the bankers, then you have the 2 parties that tend to share power, but they're actually bribed. The F-35. Any Norwegian citizen with a brain needs to know that if Norway is buying the F-35, someone has been bribed to make that possible, okay? So you have the corrupt politicians, and then you have the complicit media, and you have complicit academics as well. Most university professors do not dare to challenge the deep state. And finally, you have the secret intelligence services. In Norway, I would say to you, your secret intelligence services are getting money from the Americans that they are not declaring to the Prime Minister and Parliament. There is a secret budget from the Americans to the Norwegian secret services that is not being declared. And what the Americans are buying for that is Norwegians spying on Norwegians. Government today is about war and waste. The way governments are run, they inspire war and they inspire waste. If you have electoral reform and you combine that with the open source intelligence and open source everything engineering, then you end up supporting peace and prosperity. For example, governments should not be allowed to declare war. Only publics should be able to declare war. In the United States of America, we have 11 illegal wars. We have what are called presidential wars. That is in violation of the American Constitution, which says that America will not go to war unless Congress agrees. And in fact, we have a very corrupt system. So electoral reform is the public power part of it, and open source everything, and open source intelligence and open source everything engineering is the intellectual part of it. Open source information is 95% of what politicians and corporate leaders need in order to make good decisions. Let me start with defining the word intelligence. Intelligence actually means decision support. It doesn't mean spies and secrecy. What has happened since World War II is that the intelligence services have become consumed with spying and secrecy to the point that they are now like secret police. They are like the Stasi. Okay, in the United States of America, NSA and CIA are spying on every politician, and then they are turning around and blackmailing those politicians. Senator John McCain, Senator Lindsey Graham, and I believe also Senator Marco Rubio and Senator Chuck Schumer are all being blackmailed in order to go along with deep state policies. All right? So intelligence is about decision support, and 95% of intelligence can be done using very inexpensive open sources. The problem is that most of the information that we need is not in English, not online, not secret, and not known to the CIA. And that's why the U.S. government makes so many bad decisions. Because on the one hand, it doesn't have intelligence support for agriculture or energy or health or water decisions. And on the other hand, the deep state is working through the two-party tyranny to basically bribe all the politicians to make decisions in favor of the banks instead of in favor of the people, in favor of war instead of peace, in favor of waste instead of prosperity. So electoral reform on the one hand and open source everything on the other are how we save civilization. I was the one who introduced NATO to open source intelligence. I was invited to speak to NATO when they could not afford Alvin Toffler. He wanted $150,000 and 2 first-class tickets. I lectured all of the NATO generals on intelligence, and then I wrote the NATO Open Source Intelligence Handbook. Just like the will of Alfred Nobel, the NATO Open Source Intelligence Handbook is not being followed, because there's 2 kinds of open source intelligence. There's passive open source intelligence, which is media monitoring, reading newspapers, document exploitation. And then there's active OSINT, which is talking to humans face to face like you and I here together. Let me give you a very specific example of OSINT done properly, and I would refer all viewers to the videotape from my lecture in Denmark in April 2016, OSINT done right. It's easily found by looking for OSINT done right. In the late 1990s, the U.S. Southern Command needed an economic study of Nicaragua. They were not happy with what the CIA was producing because the CIA doesn't care about Nicaragua and doesn't have sources and doesn't have good economists. Booz Allen was willing to do a study for $250,000 that would take a year. They asked me what I could do. I said, how does $250 sound? And this was a Friday, and I said, I'll have it by Monday. And they said, you're insane. You can't do this. I said, oh, yes, I can. The governor of the Bank of Nicaragua, who just retired, lives in Minnesota, and I have his email. And they said, oh, so let's see what you can do. I sent the governor an email. I said, look, I want to FedEx you a check for $250. And what I want you to do is sit down and write a 4-page summary of the Nicaraguan economy. 1 page on where it's at today and 3 pages with graphics or illustrations on where it's going. And he did. It took him 4 hours because I knew who knew. That is open source intelligence done right. The CIA has castrated open source intelligence. NATO has castrated open source intelligence. Norway does not do open source intelligence properly because the American influence has essentially killed the baby. The biggest advantage to OSINT is that it can be shared. Part of the problem with so-called secret intelligence is the security clearance process. I participated in a global war game at the Naval War College in about 1993, I think it was, 92. And the wing commander who led the lead flight into Baghdad, he said, and I remember this vividly, he said, if you give me intelligence that is top secret and cannot be moved around the battlefield, it is useless to me. What our commanders need, in fact, there's 4 levels of OSINT. There's strategic, so what is our national security strategy? There's operational, what is our theater or campaign strategy? Then there's tactical, where are people? And then there's technical. You have the FFI in Norway, which should never have agreed to buy the F-35. And then there's acquisition intelligence at the technical level. For example, the average aviation day in Norway is cold. The F-35 and all American aircraft are built to an average aviation day that is warm and humid. It's a completely different aviation day. So the main advantage of open source intelligence for the military is that it can be shared with every military person at every level on every mission area, from artillery and armor, infantry, and so forth. Put bluntly, I can solve 95% of Norway's actual requirements for decision support with open source intelligence for 20% of what Norway is spending today on secret intelligence, because you're not spending very much. And I will tell you very truthfully, you don't need most of that secret intelligence. We don't process. We process less than 1% of what we collect with secret sources and methods. OSINT is the only way you're going to get to a military that can actually defend Norway against the real threats, poverty, infectious disease, everything, including the military. I would recommend that the Ministry of Defense in Norway sponsor a conference of the Nordic countries. So we'll include the Finns and Iceland. Sponsor conference of the Nordic countries, a no-cost conference, by invitation only, and invite people from each of the 8 tribes of OSINT. So you have academics, civil society, including labor unions, very important sources of information, commerce, especially small business, government, especially local. I was just up in Tanabro. It was wonderful. And then law enforcement, media, including bloggers, and the military and nonprofit organizations. So let's say 800 people, 100 from each country, all right, spread across those tribes. Have a conference. Define what do we need to know. And it should be an open source conference, which is to say an open space conference. It's not structured. It doesn't have a lot of formal speakers, maybe a few like myself planted to get things going. And say, where do we want to go as a nation? All right? What is our national grand strategy going to be? The whole point of grand strategy is to not only prevent wars, but to stop refugees from coming here. Those refugees are coming here because we bombed their country into nothing. And as I said somewhere else, if you continue to bomb the rest of the world, they are going to come to your neighborhood because it's the only one not being bombed. All right? So we are creating these refugees. So I would sponsor a conference. That's the first step. The second step, if you want to be clever, I have spent 30 years getting the Office of Management and Budget in the United States to agree to pay $2 billion a year for an open source agency. And I'm this close to getting to Donald Trump and showing him that an open source agency will not only destroy the fake news media and the rest of the deep state, but it will give him the information he needs to make sound decisions, such as withdrawing from NATO. I predict the United States will withdraw from NATO if Donald Trump is not assassinated. If he's assassinated, I predict we'll double down on NATO and we'll continue to do evil. All right? So I would say start with a conference, and then I would love to see, because Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, has my book. My father worked for Exxon, and my grandfather before him worked for Exxon. Rex Tillerson knows who I am. I would love to have the Norwegian Minister of Foreign Affairs, who I respect very much. I would love to have him, after this conference, invite Secretary Tillerson and Secretary Mattis, who's a Marine, as I am, invite them to have a two-way dialogue between the Nordics and the Americans and talk about what should be our grand strategy for creating peace and prosperity. How should we, in fact, invest not just in the military? One of the things that Frederick Heffermel and I have talked about, Frederick's the greatest authority on everything that's wrong with the Nobel. We've talked about how for 1/3 of what we all spend on military wars, not the military, but military wars, for 1/3 of that, we could raise the 5 billion poor. We could solve all 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals. And the reason my ideas are worthy of the Nobel, if implemented, is because I figured out how to do it for 10% of the cost of the existing industrial system. Let me give you a simple example. A tractor by John Deere costs $200,000. An open source tractor costs $20,000. 10%. And a tractor by John Deere cannot be repaired by the farmer. It has to go to a very expensive repair facility. An open source tractor is so simple it can be repaired by the farmer in the field. All right? So I think Norway, if it wants to, Norway is slipping away from its social contract. And so has the United States slipped away from its social contract. If Norway wanted to sponsor a conference, and do it soon, because there is a Reykjavik moment coming. Putin has reached out to Trump and said he'd like to have a meeting with Trump the way Reagan had a meeting with Gorbachev in Reykjavik. So in Hamburg in July of this year, there is an opportunity for Trump and Putin to announce that they are going to wage peace, create an open source agency, an international open source agency, and each country will be invited to be a part of that. And I absolutely guarantee you, if we do that, we can bury the deep state, we can lift the 5 billion poor, and we can put the public back in charge. I've spent 30 years being silenced and marginalized. And Donald Trump, for all of his warts, and he has many, has opened the door. Because he was an accidental president. A lot of people are reading my free essay online, which is also a Kindle book. It's called Donald Trump, the Accidental President Under Sage. He was not supposed to win. All the bookmakers, the House Never Loses, have said he wasn't supposed to win. Cambridge Analytica said he wasn't supposed to win. And he won by accident. And now everyone is frantically trying to get him to go away. Donald Trump has opened the door to populist power, together with Brexit. Now, in the Netherlands, we've seen that the populists did not win, but it's perhaps a good thing because that populist may have been too extreme. In France, it may be a good thing if that populist doesn't win. I'm not sure. But what is happening here is all of a sudden, the public is starting to understand that the deep state exists. And if you take the old phrase, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and if we all agree that our common enemy is the deep state, then Donald Trump is our common friend. He is a bull in a china shop, and the china that needs to be broken now is called the deep state. The New York Times and the New Yorker and what I call crap news network, CNN, are particularly evil in this regard. They know that there's a deep state, but they're in denial. They're trying to persuade the public. But most of the public now regards all of them as fake news. Okay? The deep state begins with the Rothschilds and the Vatican. They have had financial power since time immemorial. The Rothschilds were instrumental in setting up central banks. These central banks are the means by which private interests control public interests. They manipulate interest rates. I mean, Donald Trump is a billionaire, but he's laughed at by the other billionaires. And the reason he's laughed at by the other billionaires is because he actually makes his money honestly by building things. The other billionaires make their money by manipulating interest rates, by manipulating foreign exchange rates, by starting wars to drive up the price of oil so that Goldman Sachs can make its futures bet. Okay? So the deep state is about bankers, including religions, the Vatican particularly, but also the Jewish religion as manipulated by the Zionists in Israel. Saudi Arabia and Wahhabism is part of the deep state. And then you have the complicit media, complicit academics, and then you have the secret intelligence services that are using their powers to spy on politicians and blackmail the politicians on behalf of the deep state. All right? That's why electoral reform is so important. And I will tell you very sincerely, I really believe in truth and reconciliation. This is extremely important. You do not back jackals into a corner, especially billionaire jackals. Okay? What you have to do is offer them an exit strategy. Get out of our way, let us create peace and prosperity for everybody, and we will not come after you for vengeance. Now, if they don't agree, then they're going to start to die. The Chinese are already starting to kidnap Chinese billionaires and bringing them to justice. The Rothschilds are next if they don't understand that the time has come. Now, Lady Lynn Rothschild, who's a babe from New Jersey, by the way, she just married well. Lady Lynn ran a conference on inclusive capitalism. It was a good idea, badly executed. And the fact of the audience in her audience was everybody from Prince Charles, who has been associated with pedophiles, and Bill Stewart, Bill Clinton, who has been on Jeffrey Epstein's Lolita Express, which is the pedophile island run in the Caribbean, and Hillary Clinton, always traveling separately. They have different tastes, okay? Lolita Island has something for everybody, and it's wired for video and audio. Jeffrey Epstein has every major U.S. politician on video doing something terrible, probably to a child, okay, or to multiple people. The bottom line here is the United States government has become so corrupt that the time has come, I think, to clean the crap out of the stables and start over. And Donald Trump, for all of his flaws, is our legitimate president, and he has the power to make everything right. And I give Putin a lot of credit, because when Barack Obama threw 35 Soviet officers out of the United States of America, that was completely unjustified. Putin showed restraint. The United States of America may well lose some states. Hawaii and Vermont and Texas as well as possibly a portion of California. But Hawaii is the most important because Hawaii was invaded and stolen, and the legal documents have been set into Congress to provide for the release of Hawaii from the United States. If Hawaii were to leave the United States, I believe California would be cut into 2 states to keep 50 stars. And if Vermont were to leave the United States, then California would be cut into 3 states. The U.S. Constitution provides for the unity of 50 states. It is not the United Mob of America, it is the United States of America. And like the Swiss cantons, each state is a proper state of its own. What has happened over the years is the federal government has become an oppressive imperialist power in debt to the banks. We should not be borrowing money. The Constitution provides for printing money, not borrowing money. We've now reached the end of our descent into hell. And I believe that the United States, if Donald Trump is not able to exercise electoral reform and stop war and declare peace and put to death the deep state with truth and reconciliation, then I believe the United States of America will break up in the next 10 years. There will be pieces that will leave. The political landscape of the United States consists of 17% Democratic, 13% Republican, then another 20% small parties, including Libertarian, Green, and so forth, and then 50% independent, no party preference, or don't care, dropped out. I would say that given the Bernie Sanders Sandinistas in the Democratic Party, the Tea Party patriots in the Republican Party, the Libertarians, I'm a Libertarian, the Greens, and the slice of the independents that know about my ideas, I would say that people who now understand that we have a deep state is no less than 25% and maybe as high as 50%. We have reached a new stage. It is a tipping point. It is beyond a tipping point. And let me thank John Brennan, the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, because John Brennan is personally responsible for waking up the U.S. public. When he led the telling of all these lies, now remember, we've had many lies in the past. We had 935 lies about Iraq going into after 9/11. But now there's a new public consciousness. John Brennan, in 90 days, accomplished what I have not been able to do in 30 years. He overplayed his hand. He's demonstrated to the public that the secret intelligence community cannot be trusted. The mass media has lost their credibility with the public because they're now seen as fake news. And not yet complete, but if Donald Trump were to barnstorm across the United States, I believe he could demonstrate to the public that the two-party tyranny needs to go and that we need to achieve democracy in the United States. And if we do that, there will be peace and flowers and happiness, and God will smile on the world.